The wire sang a mournful tune as it snapped for the seventh night in a row, and Nora Davies stood on her porch in the pre-dawn darkness of November 1882, watching her cattle drift through the gap like ghosts in the Arizona moonlight. She had buried her husband Samuel 3 months ago, and in the weeks since, someone had been systematically destroying the fences that kept her small herd from wandering into the unforgiving desert beyond Clifton. The town itself sat nestled in a copper-rich canyon where the San Francisco River cut through the mountains, and her ranch occupied a precious strip of grazing land that half a dozen men had already tried to buy from her at shameful prices. She pulled her shawl tighter against the November chill and watched her cattle disappear into the darkness. By the time the sun rose, they would be scattered for miles, and she would spend another full day tracking them down on horseback, losing valuable time she needed for winterizing the ranch. Whoever was doing this wanted her to fail, wanted her to give up and sell, wanted her gone so a man could take over the land Samuel had worked himself into an early grave to build. The sound of hoofbeats approaching made her hand move instinctively to the rifle leaning against the porch rail, but she recognized the large bay gelding before its rider came fully into view. Benjamin Rutherford dismounted with the easy grace of a man who had spent more of his life in the saddle than out of it, and even in the darkness, she could see the concern etched across his weathered face. He was the foreman of the Triple Bar Ranch 5 miles north, a man of 30 with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water that seemed to see everything worth noticing. "Happened again," she said, and it was not a question. "Found your cattle mixing with ours about an hour ago," Benjamin said, removing his hat and running a hand through dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Got my boys separating them now, but Miss Nora, this cannot go on. You are losing money every day this happens, and winter is coming hard." "You think I do not know that?" The words came out sharper than she intended, but exhaustion and frustration had worn her patience thin. At 23, she was too young to be a widow, too stubborn to quit, and too proud to ask for the help she desperately needed. "I have ridden out there every evening at dusk, sat up until midnight, walked the fence line until my feet bled, and I never see anyone. It is like they know exactly when I give up and go inside." Benjamin replaced his hat and studied her with an expression that made her heart do something complicated in her chest. She had known him for 2 years, ever since Samuel had hired him to help with a difficult calving season, and she had always appreciated his quiet competence and the way he treated her like she had a brain in her head instead of just a pretty face. But lately, there had been something else in the way he looked at her, something that made her feel warm and nervous and hopeful all at once. "Let me watch tonight," he said quietly. "I know your land better than most, and I can stay hidden where you could not. Whoever is doing this will not be expecting a man to be there. I cannot ask you to do that. You have your own work, and the Triple Bar keeps you busy enough without adding my problems to your plate. You are not asking. I am offering." He stepped closer, and she could smell leather and sage and something else that was distinctly him. "Samuel was a good man and a good friend. I owe it to his memory to make sure his wife and his ranch stay safe." There was something in his voice when he said the word wife that made her think he wished the title belonged to someone else, but she pushed the thought away. She was being foolish, reading things into simple kindness that were not there. Benjamin Rutherford was a sought-after bachelor who could have his pick of unmarried women in Clifton, and she was a widow still wearing black, living on a failing ranch with more debts than cattle. "All right," she said finally. "Tonight. But if you fall asleep out there and freeze, I am not explaining to your boss why his best foreman is laid up with pneumonia." He smiled then, a slow spread of warmth that transformed his normally serious face into something that stole her breath. "I have slept in worse conditions than a mild Arizona November, Miss Nora. You just make sure you have hot coffee ready when I bring you the name of whoever is cutting your wire." She watched him ride away as the sky began to lighten in the east, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold that reminded her why she loved this harsh, beautiful land enough to fight for it. The copper mines had brought people to Clifton, but the ranches would keep them here, and she was determined to be part of that future even if half the town expected her to fail. The day passed in a blur of necessary chores. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, mucked out the small barn where she kept her 2 horses, and rode out to check on the cattle Benjamin's men had rounded up. The triple-bar cowboys tipped their hats to her respectfully, and she felt a surge of gratitude for Benjamin's friendship that had ensured she was treated with dignity rather than the patronizing dismissal some widows received. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, she saw Benjamin riding toward her property from the north. He had changed into darker clothes that would blend with the night, and he carried his rifle in a well-worn scabbard on his saddle. He also had a bedroll and supplies that suggested he was prepared for a long, cold night of surveillance. "You came prepared," she observed as he dismounted near her barn. "Spent 3 years tracking rustlers in Texas before I came to Arizona," he said, securing his horse in an empty stall. "Learned patience and preparation are worth more than speed and gunfire in situations like this. Where is the section that keeps getting cut?" She led him out to the eastern fence line, where the wire had been repaired so many times it looked like a patchwork quilt of different gauges and ages. The section in question ran along a small rise that overlooked both her property and a narrow canyon that led back toward town. It was isolated enough that someone could work in darkness without being easily spotted, but positioned such that cutting it would send her cattle drifting in multiple directions. "Whoever is doing this knows ranching," Benjamin said, examining the fence posts and the surrounding terrain with a practiced eye. "This is the perfect spot to cause maximum trouble with minimum effort. They are not just vandals. They are trying to run you into the ground." "I know." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the layers she wore. 4 different men have made offers on this place since Samuel died, each one lower than the last, like they are waiting for me to get desperate enough to take whatever they offer. "Who made the most recent offer?" "Carter Thompson, 2 weeks ago. Offered me half what the land is worth and acted like he was doing me a favor." She felt anger rise in her throat, hot and bitter. "Said a woman had no business trying to run a ranch alone, that I should take his money and move back east where I belong." Benjamin's jaw tightened. "Thompson owns the land just south of here. He has been buying up small ranches for the past year, consolidating. Heard he has plans to contract with the mining company for beef. You think he is behind this?" "I think tonight we find out who is behind this, and then we know how to proceed." He turned to face her fully, and in the fading light his eyes were serious. "Miss Nora, I need you to promise me something. When I catch whoever is doing this, you let me handle it. No matter who it is or what you want to do, you stay at the house and let me deal with it. This is my property, my fight. It is, and that is exactly why you need to let me handle the confrontation. If you are there when I catch them, it becomes your word against theirs about what happened and why. But if I catch them trespassing and destroying property while you are safely in your house, there is no question about the facts." She wanted to argue, but she could see the logic in his reasoning. She was already fighting against the assumption that women could not handle ranch life. She did not need to add reckless or dangerous to the list of criticisms people were eager to level at her. Fine. But you come tell me immediately after, and we go to the sheriff together in the morning. Deal." He held out his hand, and when she shook it, his grip was warm and strong and lingered just a moment longer than necessary. "Now go on back to the house. Make sure you have lights burning in the windows so it looks like you are up and about as usual. I am going to find a good spot to watch from and settle in." She left him there as darkness fell across the canyon, and the walk back to her small ranch house felt longer and lonelier than usual. She lit lamps in the kitchen and sitting room, made herself go through the motions of preparing and eating a simple dinner, and tried not to think about Benjamin sitting out in the cold November night on her behalf. The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. She mended clothes she had already mended, read the same page in her Bible 3 times without absorbing a word, and paced the wooden floors until she worried she would wear a path in them. The clock on the mantel ticked toward midnight, and still there was no sign of activity outside. She had just decided to make a fresh pot of coffee when she heard it. The distinctive snap of wire being cut, followed immediately by men's voices raised in surprise and alarm. She ran to the window and saw lamplight flaring near the fence line, illuminating 2 figures struggling while a third tried to mount a horse. Benjamin's voice rang out clear and commanding through the night. Federal offense to destroy property with the intent of driving someone off their land. I suggest you boys stay right where you are unless you want to add resisting arrest to the charges. Nora grabbed her shawl and ran out into the night, her heart pounding. By the time she reached the fence line, Benjamin had all 3 men lined up with their hands visible, their horses secured, and a grim expression on his face. The lamplight revealed faces she recognized. 2 young ranch hands who worked for Carter Thompson, and Thompson's own son, Marcus, who was about her age and had been among the most vocal critics of her attempt to keep the ranch running. "Miss Nora, I told you to stay at the house," Benjamin said without taking his eyes off the 3 men, "and I told you this is my property." She walked closer, studying the faces of the men who had been systematically trying to destroy her livelihood. Marcus Thompson. "I should have known your father would send you to do his dirty work." Marcus had the grace to look ashamed, but he lifted his chin defiantly. "This land should never have been sold to an outsider. Your husband had no right to settle here, and you have no right to stay. This canyon belongs to families who built Clifton from nothing. My husband bought this land legally and improved it with his own hands and money. The fact that we came from Missouri instead of being born here does not make us outsiders or thieves." "Enough talking," Benjamin interrupted. "You 3 are going to spend the night in my line shack, and in the morning Miss Nora and I are taking you to Sheriff Morrison. You can explain to him why you thought fence cutting was a good idea." They secured the 3 men and their horses, and Benjamin marched them north toward Triple Bar Land, while Nora followed on her own mount. The line shack was a small, sturdy building used by cowboys during roundup, and it had a heavy door that could be barred from the outside. Benjamin locked them in with blankets and water, promising to send someone with food in the morning, and then he and Nora rode back to her ranch through the moonlit darkness. "You should have seen your face when you came running out of that house," Benjamin said as they unsaddled their horses in her barn. "Looked like you were ready to take on all 3 of them yourself." "I was angry. I am still angry." She pulled the saddle off her mare with more force than necessary. "Marcus Thompson has been spreading rumors about me since Samuel died, saying I am not fit to run a ranch, that I will fail within 6 months, that I am only staying out of stubbornness and pride." "Are you staying out of stubbornness and pride?" The question was gentle, but it stopped her cold. She set the saddle on its rack and turned to face him, suddenly aware that they were alone in the warm darkness of the barn. standing close enough that she could see the stubble on his jaw and the weariness in his eyes from his long night of waiting. "I am staying because this is my home," she said quietly. "Samuel and I chose this place together. We planned our future here. When he got sick, he made me promise I would not give up on our dream just because he was not here to see it through. So no, it is not just stubbornness. It is love and loyalty and the belief that what we built together matters." Benjamin reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. He was a lucky man to have someone love him that much. I was the lucky one. He saw me as a partner, not a piece of property. He taught me everything about ranching because he wanted me to be able to stand on my own if anything happened to him. Her voice cracked slightly. "I just wish he had not been right about needing that knowledge so soon. Miss Nora." Benjamin's voice was rough with emotion. "I need to tell you something, and I hope you will not think less of me for it. I have been fighting with myself for weeks, trying to do the right thing, trying to respect your mourning period and your husband's memory. But standing here now, after nearly losing my mind worrying about you all these weeks, I cannot keep quiet anymore." Her heart began to pound so hard she was certain he could hear it. "What do you need to tell me? I am in love with you." The words came out in a rush, like he had been holding them back for so long they could not be contained anymore. "I know it is too soon, and I know you are still grieving, and I know I have no right to burden you with my feelings when you have so much else to deal with. But I cannot stand by and watch you struggle alone when all I want is to be there for you, to help you, to build a life with you if you would ever consider it." She stared at him, her mind reeling. Part of her wanted to step back, to protect herself from the vulnerability of caring for someone again, when loss was still so fresh and painful. But another part, a part that had been growing stronger every time Benjamin showed up to help without being asked, recognized the truth in his words because it echoed something in her own heart. "I am scared," she whispered. "Samuel has only been gone 3 months. What kind of wife does it make me if I have feelings for another man so soon? It makes you human. It makes you someone who needs connection and support and partnership. It makes you someone who understands that life is short and precious and not meant to be lived alone." He cupped her face in both hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "I am not asking you to forget Samuel or stop mourning him. I am just asking you to let me stand beside you while you heal. Let me be your friend and your partner, and if someday you feel ready for more, I will be the happiest man in Arizona." She closed her eyes, and tears slipped down her cheeks. When she opened them again, Benjamin was watching her with such open, honest affection that it took her breath away. This was not a man trying to take advantage of a widow. This was not someone looking to acquire her land or her livestock. This was simply a good man offering his heart with no expectations and no demands. "I think I could love you," she said softly. "I think maybe I already do a little, and it terrifies me." He smiled, and it was like the sun rising after a long, dark night. "That is more than enough for now. We will take it slow, let things develop naturally. No rushing, no pressure." She leaned into him, letting her head rest against his chest, and his arms came around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. They stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together, drawing comfort from each other's presence. "We should get some sleep," Benjamin said finally. "We have a long day ahead of us tomorrow, dealing with the sheriff and the Thompsons. Will you stay? Not in the house, I know that would not be proper, but you could sleep in the barn and I would feel better knowing you were close. I will stay as long as you need me to." She left him setting up his bedroll in the barn and walked back to the house, her mind whirling with everything that had happened. In the span of a few hours, she had caught the people sabotaging her ranch, learned that the attacks were part of a deliberate campaign to drive her away, and discovered that the man she had been trying not to care about returned her feelings. It was overwhelming and wonderful and frightening all at once. Sleep came easier than she expected, and when she woke with the sun streaming through her bedroom window, she felt more rested than she had in weeks. She dressed quickly and went to the kitchen to start breakfast, and by the time Benjamin knocked on her door, she had coffee brewing and bacon sizzling in the pan. "Morning," he said, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. His hair was damp, suggesting he had washed at the pump outside, and he looked tired but happy. "Sleep well, better than I have in a long time. You, well enough for a barn floor." He accepted the cup of coffee she poured for him and wrapped his hands around it gratefully. "I sent one of my boys to the line shack with food for our prisoners and instructions to keep watch until we get back with the sheriff." They ate breakfast together at her small kitchen table, and there was an ease between them that had not been there before, as if confessing their feelings had removed a barrier neither had fully acknowledged. After they ate, they rode into Clifton together, their horses moving side by side down the canyon road as morning light turned the rocks to gold and copper. Sheriff Morrison listened to their story with increasing anger, his weathered face growing red as Benjamin described finding the three men actively cutting Nora's fence. He was a fair man who had served Clifton for nearly 10 years, and he took property crimes seriously in a region where land and water rights could mean the difference between prosperity and ruin. "Carter Thompson has been pushing boundaries for months now," Morrison said, leaning back in his desk chair. "Trying to buy up everything he can, making life difficult for people who will not sell. But this crosses a line. Fence cutting is a serious offense, and if his son and his employees are involved, he bears responsibility." "What will happen to them?" Nora asked. "They will be arrested, charged, and tried. If convicted, they are looking at jail time and fines. And I will be having a very pointed conversation with Carter Thompson about controlling his people and respecting his neighbors' property rights." They rode out to the line shack with the sheriff and 2 deputies, collected the 3 prisoners who looked significantly less defiant in the harsh light of morning, and brought them back to town to be formally charged. Word spread quickly through Clifton, as it always did in small towns, and by the time Nora and Benjamin left the sheriff's office, people were stopping them on the street to express support and sympathy. "I knew those Thompson boys were trouble," Mrs. Henderson said, clutching her shopping basket. "And I told Carter to his face that trying to force you off your land was shameful behavior. You stay strong, dear. A woman has every right to own property and make her own way in the world." Similar conversations happened half a dozen more times before they finally made it out of town, and Nora felt something loosen in her chest. She had been so focused on the struggle to keep her ranch running that she had not realized how many people in Clifton actually supported her efforts. The vocal critics had made her feel isolated and judged, but they had just been the loudest voices, not the majority opinion. "See," Benjamin said as they rode home, "you are not as alone as you thought. I am starting to realize that. And I am starting to realize that asking for help does not make me weak or incapable. It just makes me smart enough to know I cannot do everything by myself. Does that mean you will let me keep helping you?" She looked at him, this good man who had stayed up all night in the cold to protect her property, who had confessed his feelings while promising not to rush her, who treated her as an equal partner instead of a problem to be solved. "I think that means I want you to help me not just with the ranch, but with everything, if you are willing." The smile that spread across his face was worth more than all the land in Arizona. "I am willing. I am more than willing." They spent the next several weeks working together to prepare her ranch for winter. Benjamin came over every day after finishing his duties at the Triple Bar, and together they repaired fences, moved cattle to better grazing, and stockpiled feed and supplies. He never made her feel incompetent or incapable, instead asking her opinion on decisions and respecting her knowledge of her own land and livestock. As November gave way to December, their relationship deepened in quiet, natural ways. He started staying for dinner most nights, and they would sit by her fire afterward, talking about everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, learning to ride before he could walk, losing his parents to cholera when he was 17, and having to make his own way in the world. She told him about meeting Samuel at a church social in Missouri, falling in love with his kindness and sense of adventure, and making the difficult decision to leave her family behind and move west to start a new life. "You ever regret coming to Arizona?" Benjamin asked one evening as snow began to fall outside, the first real storm of winter. "No. Even with everything that has happened, even losing Samuel, I do not regret it. This land gets into your blood somehow. The space, the freedom, the challenge of it. I cannot imagine living anywhere else now." She looked at him across the firelight. "What about you? Do you ever think about going back to Texas?" "Not anymore. Not since I found a reason to stay in Arizona that matters more than anything I left behind." She knew he meant her, and the knowledge filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Benjamin, I need to tell you something. When I said I thought I could love you, I was being cautious because I was scared, but I am not scared anymore. I know I love you. I know it in my bones the same way I know this land is worth fighting for." He was across the room and pulling her into his arms before she could take another breath. "Say it again. I love you. Again. I love you, Benjamin Rutherford." He kissed her then, a slow, deep kiss that felt like a promise and a homecoming all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers and said, "Marry me. I know it is fast and I know people will talk, but I do not care. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving I am worthy of your trust." "Yes." The word came without hesitation, without doubt. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at Clifton's church, with half the town in attendance to bear witness. Nora wore a dress of deep blue instead of traditional white, a deliberate choice that honored her past while embracing her future. Benjamin wore his best suit and could not stop smiling throughout the entire ceremony. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared drew applause and more than a few happy tears from the congregation. Carter Thompson did not attend, but he sent a written apology and a substantial check to cover the damages his son and employees had caused. Marcus Thompson himself was serving 6 months in jail for fence cutting, and the 2 ranch hands had been fired and run out of the county. The attempted land grab had failed, and Nora's right to her property was now firmly established and defended. Benjamin moved into her ranch house that same day, bringing his few possessions and his good horse and the promise of partnership in every sense of the word. The Triple Bar's owner, understanding the situation, promoted one of the senior cowboys to foreman and gave Benjamin his blessing to focus on building up the Davies ranch, which would now carry both their names. That winter was hard but joyful. They worked side by side through snow and cold, learning each other's rhythms and habits, building a life together from the foundation of mutual respect and growing love. Benjamin brought ranching knowledge and physical strength to tasks that had been overwhelming for Nora alone, and she brought business acumen and careful planning that helped them make smart decisions about their resources and investments. By the time spring arrived in 1883, bringing wildflowers and green grass and newborn calves. The ranch was thriving in ways it never had before. They had expanded their herd, repaired all the buildings, and even made a down payment on an additional 20 acres that adjoined their property. The copper mines continued to hunger for beef, and the Rutherford Ranch was positioned to meet that demand. "I have news," Nora said one evening in late April as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and violet. "Good news or bad news?" Benjamin asked, though his tone suggested he suspected which it might be. "Good news. Very good news." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Sometime in early November, the doctor thinks." The expression on his face cycled through surprise, joy, wonder, and fierce protectiveness in the span of seconds. "A baby! We are going to have a baby!" He pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly. "You have made me the happiest man alive, Nora Rutherford." "I am pretty happy myself, Benjamin Rutherford." The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. They converted Samuel's old office into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and building a cradle from pine wood Benjamin cut and shaped himself. Nora continued working the ranch until she grew too ungainly to ride comfortably, at which point she shifted to managing the books and business side while Benjamin and 2 hired hands handled the physical labor. True to the doctor's prediction, their son was born in the first week of November, exactly 1 year after Benjamin had caught the fence cutters and changed both their lives forever. They named him Samuel Benjamin Rutherford, honoring both the man whose dream had built the ranch and the man who had helped it flourish. He was a healthy, loud baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. And from the moment Benjamin held him, Nora knew their family was complete and perfect. "Thank you," Benjamin whispered that first night as they sat together in the nursery, watching their son sleep in the cradle he had built. "Thank you for letting me love you, for trusting me, for building this life with me. Thank you for being patient, for being kind, for seeing me as a partner instead of a problem to be solved." She leaned against him, exhausted but happier than she had ever imagined being. "Thank you for watching all night and catching the people who were trying to drive me away. If you had not done that, I do not know where I would be right now. You would have found a way. You are the strongest person I know." He kissed the top of her head. "But I am grateful every day that I get to be part of your way forward instead of just watching from a distance." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper, growing into one of the most respected cattle operations in the Clifton area. They added 2 more children to their family, a daughter named Sarah in 1885 and another son named Thomas in 1887. The house that had once felt too empty and quiet for a grieving widow became filled with the sounds of children laughing, boots stomping on wooden floors, and the everyday chaos of a family building a life together. Samuel Benjamin grew into a serious boy who loved working with the cattle, and often declared he would run the biggest ranch in Arizona someday. Sarah was adventurous and fearless, constantly climbing things she should not and bringing home injured animals to nurse back to health. Thomas was the baby, sweet-natured and affectionate, content to follow his older siblings around and try to keep up with their adventures. Benjamin proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, spending hours teaching his children to ride, to rope, to understand the land and animals that sustained their family. He never raised his voice in anger, never lifted a hand in violence, and always treated Nora with the respect and partnership he had promised on the day they married. On their 10th wedding anniversary in December 1892, they stood together on the same porch where Nora had once watched her fences fall and her cattle scatter. and they looked out at a ranch that had grown far beyond anything she had dreamed possible. The original house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. The barn was new and 3 times the size of the old one. Their cattle numbered in the hundreds, and they employed 5 full-time ranch hands plus additional help during busy seasons. "You ever think about that night?" Benjamin asked, pulling her close against the December chill. "The night I caught Marcus Thompson and his boys cutting your fence. I think about it all the time. I think about how close I came to losing everything, and how one act of kindness from you changed the entire trajectory of my life." She turned in his arms to face him. "I think about how scared I was to love again, and how grateful I am that I was brave enough to take that chance. I am the one who should be grateful. You took a rough-edged cowboy with nothing but a good horse and a steady job, and let him become part of something bigger. You made me a husband, a father, a rancher. You made me better than I ever thought I could be." She kissed him then, a kiss that held 10 years of partnership and passion and unwavering commitment. When they broke apart, she said, "We made each other better." That is what love does when it is real and built on solid ground. As if summoned by their parents' moment of reflection, 3 children came tumbling out onto the porch, arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Benjamin separated them with practiced ease, assigning chores and sending them off in different directions, and Nora watched with a heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what she and Samuel had dreamed of when they left Missouri. A thriving ranch, a growing family, a place of their own in the wide Arizona territory. Samuel had not lived to see it fully realized, but she liked to think he would be proud of what she and Benjamin had built together. Proud that she had kept her promise not to give up. Proud that she had found love again with a good man who honored his memory by treating his widow and his legacy with respect. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Benjamin pulled out a piece of paper and showed it to Nora. "I have been thinking. The ranch has done well these past 10 years, really well, and I have been setting aside money for something special." "What kind of something special?" "Land. There are 2 sections to our west that just came available. If we bought them, we would control the entire southern end of the canyon, and we would have enough range to double our herd over the next 5 years. He watched her face carefully. "It would be a big investment, a big risk, but I think it is a smart move for our future and our children's future." She studied the paper, which outlined the parcels, the price, and a detailed financial projection. It was exactly the kind of careful planning she appreciated, the kind of partnership decision they had been making together for a decade. "How much would we need to borrow?" "Nothing. We have enough saved to buy it outright and still keep our operating reserve intact." She looked up at him in surprise. "Benjamin, that is a lot of money. Are you sure you want to spend our savings on this?" "I am sure I want to invest in our family's future. This ranch is going to support our children and grandchildren someday. The more solid we make its foundation now, the better off they will be later." He took her hands. "But this is our decision, not just mine. What do you think?" She thought about the scared, grieving widow she had been 10 years ago, fighting to hold onto a struggling ranch that everyone expected her to lose. She thought about the partnership she and Benjamin had built, the trust they had earned from each other through years of shared labor and shared dreams. She thought about Samuel Benjamin declaring he would run the biggest ranch in Arizona, and Sarah asking when she could learn to brand cattle, and Thomas begging for a pony of his own. "I think we should buy the land," she said firmly. "I think we should keep building and growing and showing everyone who doubted us exactly what we are capable of achieving." The smile that spread across Benjamin's face was radiant. "Have I told you lately that I love you, Nora Rutherford?" "Not in the last hour." You are getting lazy." He laughed and pulled her into his arms. "I love you. I love your courage and your stubbornness and your brilliant mind. I love that you never gave up, even when everyone expected you to fail. I love that you trusted me enough to let me into your life when you had every reason to protect yourself. I love everything about you, and I thank God every day for the night your fences were cut, and I had the excuse to finally act on feelings I had been hiding for months." "Those fence cutters did us a favor," she agreed, laughing. "Remind me to send Marcus Thompson a thank you note when he gets out of prison. He got out 5 years ago and moved to California. Heard he is working in a hardware store and staying out of trouble. Good for him. I hope he learned something from the experience." They stood together in the quiet house, holding each other and reflecting on the journey that had brought them from that November night to this place of security and happiness. The ranch around them was silent except for the usual sounds of animals settling for the night and wind moving through the canyon. It was the sound of home, of safety, of dreams achieved through hard work and unwavering partnership. In the years that followed, they did buy those 2 sections of land, and their ranch continued to grow and prosper. Samuel Benjamin took over operations when he turned 21, bringing fresh ideas and new energy while respecting the foundation his parents had built. Sarah married a veterinarian and started the first animal hospital in Clifton, serving ranchers throughout the region. Thomas discovered a talent for business and opened a cattle brokerage that helped small ranchers get fair prices for their livestock. Benjamin and Nora grew old together on the ranch they had saved and built, watching their grandchildren play in the same yard where their own children had grown up. They never forgot the night that had brought them together, the night someone had cut her fences and he had watched until dawn to catch them. It had been an act of destruction meant to drive her away, but instead it had created an opportunity for love to bloom in the harsh Arizona soil. On a warm spring evening in 1910, when they had been married for 28 years and the ranch sprawled across thousands of acres, Nora and Benjamin sat together on their porch and watched the sunset paint the mountains in familiar shades of gold and copper. Their hair was gray now, their hands weathered by decades of hard work, but their love was as strong as it had been that first winter when everything was new and fragile. "No regrets?" Benjamin asked, taking her hand and threading his fingers through hers. "Not a single one," Nora said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Not one single regret about any of it." And as the sun dipped below the mountains and stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence. 2 people who had faced hardship and emerged stronger, who had taken broken fences and built an unbreakable bond, who had proven that love, when given the chance to grow at its own pace in honest soil, could create something that lasted forever.